Coming at you live from the beautiful heartland of these good old United States of America, right at the confluence of the mighty Mississippi and the majestic Missouri rivers, St. Charles, Missouri. This is The Rant. I am your host, Charles Lamson. I'll be with you for the next 2 hours. All right, today is Friday, 25th day of January, year of our Lord, 2020. Today's topic, this is going to be part 2 of a little mashup I like to call, what is it? Economic managing for competitive advantage. That's right, the first half of the big show. The reason I call it a little mashup, because the first half, I do all kinds of things, in the show. I have a little something for everyone. So, first half of the big show, I'm going to be doing a seance. I'm going to summon the spirit, once again, of one of the most famous economists of all time, Alfred Marshall. And then he is going to be speaking with us via a crack team of spiritual media. And he is going to talk with us, share his principles of economics with us. And we're going to do that for the first half of the show. Also, those of you tuning in on YouTube, I'm also going to be doing a motivational, inspirational, 50-year-old guy, disabled guy, fitness instructional video. That's right. So once again, those of you who are old fans of the YouTube channel will notice I haven't been increasing weight, so I have been making gains. It is possible to make gains once when you're past 50. At one point I got real weak there. Had some health problems a couple of years back. Got really weak, but I was starting to think that I had sort of reached a plateau. I couldn't really make any gains anymore, but that's not true. But I've really been kind of a Nazi, though, about my diet and supplements and all of that kind of stuff as well. But so anyway, I made a gain. I made some gains. Going to be using some 15-pound dumbbells and some 10-pound dumbbells and a little 12-pound therapeutic bar. So we're going to be doing that first half of the show. Then I'm going to close that first half of the show by doing a banishing ritual. And then I'm going to send Alfred Marshall's spirit straight back to hell, where he belongs. And then I am going to share some management tips and strategies with you. And that's going to be the management part of the show. So, like I said, it's a little mashup that I like to call economic managing. Economic managing for competitive advantage. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let's get this shindig started. Hey, Alfred, help us out. Are you there? Please share with us your wisdom.
The amount demanded increases in consequence of a small fall in the price, varies inversely as the n+1 power of the price. In the case of the constant outlay curves, it varies inversely as the square of the price, or, which is the same thing in this case, directly as the square of the amount. Note 4. The lapse of time being measured downwards along OY and the amounts of which record is being made being measured by distances from OY, then P' and P being adjacent points on the curve which traces the growth of the amount, the rate of increase in a small unit of time n-n is pH over P-n- equals pH over P-h multiplied by P-h over P-n- equals Pn over n lowercase t multiplied by P-h over P-n- equals P dash H over N lowercase t, since Pn and P dash N dash are equal in the limit. If we take a year as the unit of time, we find the annual rate of increase represented by the inverse of the number of years in N lowercase t. If N lowercase t were equal to C, a constant for all points on the curve, then the rate of increase would be constant and equal to 1 over C. In this case, minus x multiplied by the differential of y over the differential of x equals C for all values of x. That is, the equation to the curve is y equals a minus c log x. Note 5. We have seen in the text that the rate at which future pleasures are discounted varies greatly from one individual to another. Let R be the rate of interest per annum, which must be added to a present pleasure in order to make it just balance a future pleasure that will be of equal amount to its recipient when it comes. Then R may be 50 or even 200% to one person, while for his neighbour it is a negative quantity. Moreover, some pleasures are more urgent than others, and it is conceivable even that a person may discount future pleasures in an irregular, random way. He may be almost as willing to postpone a pleasure for 2 years as for one, or on the other hand, he may object very strongly indeed to a long postponement, but scarcely at all to a short one. There is some difference of opinion as to whether such irregularities are frequent, and the question cannot easily be decided. For since the estimate of a pleasure is purely subjective, it would be difficult to detect them if they did occur. In a case in which there are no such irregularities, the rate of discount will be the same for each element of time, or to state the same thing in other words, it will obey the exponential law. And if h be the future amount of a pleasure of which the probability is p, and which will occur, if at all, at time t, and if capital R equals 1 plus lowercase r, then the present value of the pleasure is ph capital R to the power of minus t. It must, however, be borne in mind that this result belongs to hedonics and not properly to economics. Arguing still on the same hypothesis, we may say that if pi be the probability that a person will derive an element of happiness, delta h, from the possession of, say, a piano in the element of time, delta t, then the present value of the piano to him is pi by capital R to the power minus t times the differential of h over the differential of t times the differential of t for values between 0 and capital T. If we are to include all the happiness that results from the event at whatever distance of time, we must take t equals infinity. If the source of pleasure is, in Bentham's phrase, impure, the differential of h over the differential of t will probably be negative for some values of t, and of course the whole value of the integral may be negative. Note 6. If y be the price at which an amount x of a commodity can find purchasers in a given market, and y equals function of x be the equation to the demand curve, then the total utility of the commodity is measured by function x by the differential of x for values between 0 and a, where a is the amount consumed. If, however, an amount b of the commodity is necessary for existence, the function of z will be infinite, or at least indefinitely great, for values of x less than b. We must therefore take life for granted and estimate separately the total utility of that part of the supply of the commodity which is in excess of absolute necessaries. It is, of course, the function of x by the differential of x for values between b and a. There are several commodities which will satisfy the same imperative want, as for example water and milk, either of which will quench thirst. We shall find that under the ordinary conditions of life, no great error is introduced by adopting the simple plan of assuming that the necessary supply comes exclusively from that one which is cheapest. It should be noted that, in the discussion of consumer surplus, we assume that the marginal utility of money to the individual purchaser is the same throughout. Strictly speaking, we ought to take account of the fact that if he spends less on tea, the marginal utility of money to him would be less than it is, and he would get an element of consumer surplus from buying other things at prices which now yield to him no such rent. But these changes of consumer's rent, being of the second order of smallness, may be neglected on the assumption which underlies our whole reasoning that his expenditure on any one thing, as for instance tea, is only a small part of his whole expenditure. If for any reason it be desirable to take account of the influence which his expenditure on tea exerts on the value of money to him, it is only necessary to multiply the function of x within the integral given above by that function of x by function x, i.e. of the amount which he has already spent on tea, which represents the marginal utility to him of money when his stock of it has been diminished by that amount. Note 7. Thus, if A1, A2, A3, and so on, be the amounts consumed of the several commodities of which B1, B2, B3, and so on are necessary for existence, if y equals function 1 of x, y equals function 2 of x, y equals function 3 of x, and so on, be the equations to their demand curves, and if we may neglect any inequalities in the distribution of wealth, then the total utility of income, subsistence being taken for granted, might be represented by the sum of the function of x by the differential of x for values between b and a. If we could find a plan for grouping together in one common demand curve all those things which satisfy the same wants and arrivals, and also for every group of things of which the services are complementary. But we cannot do this, and therefore the formula remains a mere general expression, having no practical application. Note 8. If y be the happiness which a person derives from an income x, and if, after Bernoulli, we assume that the increased happiness which he derives from the addition of 1% to his income is the same whatever his income be, we have x by the differential of y over the differential of x equals k, and therefore y equals k log x plus c, when k and c are constants. Further, with Bernoulli, let us assume that A being the income which affords the barest necessaries of life, pain exceeds pleasure when the income is less than A, and balances it when the income equals A. Then our equation becomes y equals k log x over A. Of course, both k and A vary with the temperament, the health, the habits, and the social surroundings of each individual. Laplace gives to x the name fortune physique, and to y the name fortune morale. Bernoulli himself seems to have thought of x and a as representing certain amounts of property rather than of income. But we cannot estimate the property necessary for life without some understanding as to the length of time during which it is to support life, that is, without really treating it as income. Perhaps the guess which has attracted the most attention after Bernoulli's is Kramer's suggestion that the pleasure afforded by wealth may be taken to vary as the square root of its amount. Note 9. The argument that fair gambling is an economic blunder is generally based on Bernoulli's or some other definite hypothesis. But it requires no further assumption than that firstly, the pleasure of gambling may be neglected, and secondly, phi double dash of x is negative for all values of x, where phi of x is the pleasure derived from the wealth equal to x. For suppose that the chance that a particular event will happen is p, and a man makes a fair bet of py against 1 minus py, then it will happen. By so doing, he changes his expectation of happiness from phi of x to p phi of x plus 1 minus py plus 1 minus p phi x minus py. This, when expanded by Taylor's theorem, becomes phi of x plus half of p by 1 minus p squared, y squared, phi double dash of x plus theta by 1 minus p by y, plus half of p squared by 1 minus p by y squared by phi double dash by x minus theta py. assuming phi double dash of x to be negative for all values of x. This is always less than phi of x. It is true that this loss of probable happiness need not be greater than the pleasure derived from the excitement of gambling, and we are then thrown back upon the induction that pleasures of gambling are, in Bentham's phrase, impure, since experience shows that they are likely to engender a restless, feverish character, unsuited for steady work, as well as for the higher and more solid pleasures of life. Note 10. Following on the same lines as in Note 1, let us take V to represent the disutility or discommodity of an amount of labour L. Then the differential of V over the differential of L measures the marginal degree of disutility of labour, and, subject to the qualifications mentioned in text, the square of the differential of V over the differential of L squared is positive. Let M be the amount of money or general purchasing power at a person's disposal. Mu is the total utility to him, and therefore the differential of mu over the differential of M its marginal utility. Thus, if delta W be the wages that must be paid to him to induce him to do labour delta L, then delta W by the differential of mu over the differential of M equals delta V, and the differential of W over the differential of L multiplied by the differential of mu over the differential of M equals the differential of V over the differential of L. If we assume that his dislike to labour is not a fixed but a fluctuating quantity, we may regard the differential of W over the differential of L as a function of M, V and L, and then both the square of the differential of W over the differential of M by the differential of L and the square of the differential of W over the differential of V by the differential of dl are always positive. Note 11. If members of any species of bird begin to adopt aquatic habits, every increase in the webs between the toes, whether coming about gradually by the operation of natural selection or suddenly as a sport, will cause them to find their advantage more in aquatic life and will make their chance of leaving offspring depend more on the increase of the web. So that if the function of t be the average area of the web at time t, then the rate of increase of the web increases within certain limits with every increase in the web. And therefore, f double dash of t is positive. Now we know by Taylor's theorem that the function of t plus h equals the function of t plus hf dash of t plus the square of h over 1.2 by f double dash t plus theta h. And if h be large, so that h squared is very large, then the function of t plus h will be much greater than the function of t, even though f dash of t be small and f double dash of t is never large. There is more than a superficial connection between the advance made by the application of the differential calculus to physics at the end of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th, and the rise of the theory of evolution. In sociology as well as in biology, we are learning to watch the accumulated effects of forces which, though weak at first, get greater strength from the growth of their own effects, and the universal form, of which every such fact is a special embodiment, is Taylor's theorem. Or, if the action of more than one cause at a time is to be taken account of, the corresponding expression of a function of several variables. This conclusion will remain valid even if further investigation confirms the suggestion made by some Mendelians that gradual changes in the race are originated by large divergences of individuals from the prevailing type. For economics is a study of mankind of particular nations, of particular social strata, and it is only indirectly concerned with the lives of men of exceptional genius or exceptional wickedness and violence. Note 12. If, as in Note 10, V be the discommodity of the amount of labour which a person has to exert in order to obtain an amount X of a commodity from which he derives a pleasure U, then the pleasure of having further supplies will be equal to the pain of getting them when the differential of U over the differential of X equals the differential of V over the differential of X. If the pain of labour be regarded as a negative pleasure, and when we write capital U is congruent to minus V, then the differential of U over the differential of X plus the differential of U over the differential of X equals 0, i.e. U equals capital U equals a maximum at the point at which his labour ceases. Note 12 this. In an article in the Giornale degli Economisti for February 1891, Professor Edgeworth draws a diagram which represents the cases of barter of apples for nuts. Apples are measured along OX and nuts along OY. OP equals 4, PA equals 40, and A represents the termination of the first bargain in which 4 apples have been exchanged for 40 nuts, in the case in which A gets the advantage at starting. B represents the second and C the final stage of that case. On the other hand, A' represents the first and B-C-D' the second, third and final stages of the set of bargains in which B gets the advantage at starting. QP, the locus on which C and D' must both necessarily lie, is called by Professor Edgeworth the contract curve. Following a method adopted in his Mathematical Psychics, 1881, he takes capital U to represent the total utility of capital A of apples and nuts when he has given up X apples and received Y nuts, V the total utility of B apples and nuts when he has received X apples and given up Y nuts. If an additional delta X apples are exchanged for delta Y nuts, the exchange will be indifferent to A if the differential of capital U over the differential of X by delta X plus the differential of capital U over the differential of Y by delta Y equals 0, and it will be indifferent to B if the differential of V over the differential of X by delta X plus the differential of V over the differential of Y by delta Y equals 0. These, therefore, are the equations to the indifference curves OP and OQ of the figure, respectively. And the contract curve, which is the locus of points at which the terms of exchange that are indifferent to A are also indifferent to B, has the elegant equation: the differential of capital U over the differential of X divided by the differential of capital U over the differential of Y equals the differential of capital V over the differential of X divided by the differential of capital B over the differential of Y. If the marginal utility of nuts be constant for A and also for B, the differential of capital U over the differential of Y and the differential of capital V over the differential of Y become constant. Capital U becomes phi of A minus X plus the change in Y, and V becomes psi of A minus X plus B to Y, and the contract curves becomes function of X equals 0 or X equals C, that is a straight line parallel to OY, and the value of delta Y to delta X given by either of the indifference curves, a function of C, thus showing that by whatever route the barter may have started, equilibrium will have been found at a point at which C apples have been exchanged, and the final rate of exchange is a function of C, that is, it is a constant also. This last application of Professor Edgeworth's mathematical version of the theory of barter to confirm the results reached in the text was first made by Mr. Berry and is published in the Giornale degli Economisti for June 1891. Professor Edgeworth's plan of representing U and V as general functions of X and Y has great attractions to the mathematician, but it seems less adapted to express the everyday facts of economic life than that of regarding, as Jevons did, the marginal utilities of apples as functions of X simply. In that case, if A had no nuts at starting and is assumed in the particular case under discussion, U takes the form phi 1 of A minus X by the differential of X for values between 0 and X, plus psi 1 of Y by the differential of Y for values between 0 and Y. Similarly for V. And then the equation to the contract curve is of the form phi1 of A minus X divided by psi1 of Y equals phi2 of X divided by psi2 of B minus Y, which is one of the equations of exchange in Jevons theory. Note 13. Using the same notation as in Note 5, let us take our starting point as regards the time at the date of beginning to build the house, and let capital T dash be the time occupied in building it. Then the present value of the pleasures, which he expects to derive from the house, is capital H equals pi r to the minus t by the differential of h over the differential of t by the differential of t, for values between t dash and t. Let delta v be the element of effort that will be incurred by him in building the house in the interval of time delta t, between the time t and the time t plus delta t. Then the present value of the aggregate of effort is v equals r to the minus t by the differential of v over the differential of t by the differential of t, for values between 0 and t dash. If there is any uncertainty as to the labour that will be required, every possible element must be counted in, multiplied by the probability pi dash of its being required, and then capital V becomes pi r to the minus t by the differential of v over the differential of t by the differential of t, for values between 0 and capital T dash. If we transfer the starting point to the date of the completion of the house, we have h equals pi r to the minus t by the differential of h over the differential of t by the differential of t, for values between 0 and t1. And v equals pi r to the t by the differential of v over the differential of t by the differential of t, for values between 0 and t dash, where t1 equals t minus t dash. And this starting point, though perhaps the less natural from the mathematical point of view, is the more natural from the point of view of ordinary business. Adopting it, we see v as the aggregate of estimated pains incurred, each bearing on its back, as it were, the accumulated burden of the weightings between the time of its being incurred and the time when it begins to bear fruit. Jevons' discussion of the investment of capital is somewhat injured by the unnecessary assumption that the function representing it is an expression of the first order, which is the more remarkable as he had himself, when describing Gosson's work, pointed out the objections to the plan, followed by him and Rule, of substituting straight lines for the multiform curves that represent the true character of the variations of economic quantities. End of part 1. Part 2 of the Mathematical Appendix. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Carl Manchester, 2008. Note 14. Let alpha 1, alpha 2, alpha 3, etc. be the several amounts of different kinds of labour, as for instance, wood cutting, stone carrying, earth digging, etc., on the part of the man in question that would be used in building the house on any given plan. And beta, beta dash, beta double dash, etc., the several amounts of accommodation of different kinds, such as sitting rooms, bedrooms, offices, etc., which the house would afford on that plan. Then, using V and H as in the previous note, V, beta, beta dash, beta double dash are all functions of alpha 1, alpha 2, alpha 3, and so on. And H being a function of beta, beta dash, beta double dash is a function also of alpha 1, alpha 2, alpha 3. We have then to find the marginal investments of each kind of labour for each kind of use. The differential of V over the differential of A1 equals the differential of H over the differential of beta by the differential of beta over the differential of A1, equals the differential of h over the differential of beta dash by the differential of beta dash over the differential of a1 equals the differential of h over the differential of beta double dash by the differential of beta double dash over the differential of a1, and so on. These equations represent a balance of effort and benefit. The real cost to him of a little extra labour spent on cutting timber and working it up is just balanced by the benefit of the extra sitting room or bedroom accommodation that he could get by so doing. If, however, instead of doing the work himself, he pays carpenters to do it. We must take V to represent not his total effort, but his total outlay of general purchasing power. Then, the rate of pay which he is willing to give to carpenters for further labour, his marginal demand price for their labour, is measured by the differential of V over the differential of A, while the differential of H over the differential of beta, the differential of H over the differential of beta dash, are the money measures to him of the marginal utilities of extra sitting room and bedroom accommodation respectively, that is, his marginal demand prices for them. And the differential of beta over the differential of A and the differential of beta dash over the differential of A are the marginal efficiencies of carpenters' labour in providing those accommodations. The equations then state that the demand price for carpenters' labour tends to be equal to the demand price for extra sitting room accommodation and also for extra bedroom accommodation, and so on, multiplied in each case by the marginal efficiency of the work of carpenters in providing that extra accommodation, proper units being chosen for each element. When this statement is generalised, so as to cover all the varied demand in a market for carpenters' labour, it becomes the marginal demand price for carpenters' labour is the marginal efficiency of carpenters' labour in increasing the supply of any product, multiplied by the marginal demand price for that product. Or to put the same thing in other words, the wages of a unit of carpenters' labour tends to be equal to the value of such part of any of the products to producing which their labour contributes, as represents the marginal efficiency of a unit of carpenters' labour with regard to that product, or to use a phrase with which we shall be much occupied in Book 6, Chapter 1, it tends to be equal to the value of the net product of their labour. This proposition is very important and contains within itself the kernel of the demand side of the theory of distribution. Let us then suppose a master builder to have in mind to erect certain buildings and to be considering what different accommodation he shall provide, as for instance dwelling houses, warehouses, factories and retail shop room. There will be two classes of questions for him to decide: how much accommodation of each kind he shall provide, and by what means he shall provide it. Thus, besides deciding whether to erect villa residences offering a certain amount of accommodation, he has to decide what agents of production he will use, and in what proportions, whether, for example, he will use tile or slate, how much stone he will use, whether he will use steam power for making mortar, etc., or only for crane work, and if he is in a large town, whether he will have his scaffolding put up by men who make that work a speciality, or by ordinary labourers, and so on. Let him then decide to provide an amount beta of villa accommodation, an amount beta dash of warehouse, an amount beta double dash of factory accommodation, and so on, each of a certain class. But instead of supposing him to hire simply alpha 1, alpha 2, and so on, quantities of different kinds of labour, as before, let us class his expenditure under the three heads of 1. Wages, 2. Prices of raw material, and 3. Interest on capital, while the value of his own work and enterprise makes a fourth head. Thus, let X1, X2, and so on be the amounts of different classes of labour, including that of superintendents, which he hires, the amount of each kind of labour being made up of its duration and its intensity. Let Y1, Y2, and so on be amounts of various kinds of raw materials which are used up and embodied in the buildings, which may be supposed to be sold freehold. In that case, the pieces of land on which they are severally built are merely particular forms of raw material from the present point of view, which is that of the individual undertaker. Next, let Z be the amount of locking up, or appropriation of the employment, of capital for the several purposes. Here we must reckon in all forms of capital reduced to a common money measure, including advances for wages, for the purchase of raw material, also the uses allowing for wear and tear, etc., of his plant of all kinds, his workshops themselves and the ground on which they are built being reckoned on the same footing. The periods during which the various lockings up run will vary, but they must be reduced on a compound rate, i.e. according to geometrical progression, to a standard unit, say a year. Fourthly, let U represent the money equivalent to his own labour, worry, anxiety, wear and tear, etc., involved in the several undertakings. In addition, there are several elements which might have been entered under separate heads, but which we may suppose combined with those already mentioned. Thus, the allowance to be made for risk may be shared between the last two heads. A proper share of the general expenses of working the business, supplementary costs, will be distributed among the four heads of wages, raw materials, interest on the capital value of the organisation of the business, its goodwill, etc., regarded as a going concern, and remuneration of the builder's own work, enterprise and anxiety. Under these circumstances, V represents his total outlay and H his total receipts, and his efforts are directed to making H minus V a maximum. On this plan, we have equations similar to those already given, viz. The differential of V over the differential of x1 equals the differential of H over the differential of beta multiplied by the differential of beta over the differential of x1 equals the differential of H over the differential of beta dash multiplied by the differential of beta dash over the differential of x1, and so on. That is to say, the marginal outlay which the builder is willing to make for an additional small supply, delta x1 of the first class of labour, viz. The differential of V over the differential of x1 by delta x1 is equal to the differential of H over the differential of beta multiplied by the differential of beta over the differential of x1 by delta x1, i.e. to that increment of his total receipts H, which he will obtain by the increase in the villa accommodation provided by him that will result from the extra small supply of the first class of labour. This will equal a similar sum with regard to warehouse accommodation and so on. Thus, he will have distributed his resources between various uses in such a way that he would gain nothing by diverting any part of any agent of production, labour, raw materials, the use of capital, nor his own labour and enterprise from one class of building to another. Also, he would gain nothing by substituting one agent for another in any branch of his enterprise, nor indeed by any increase or diminution of his use of any agent. From this point of view, our equations have a drift very similar to the argument of Book 3, Chapter 5, as to the choice between the different uses of the same thing. Compare one of the most interesting notes, F, attached to Professor Edgeworth's brilliant address to the British Association in 1889. There is more to be said on the difficulty of interpreting the phrase net product of any agent of production, whether a particular kind of labour or any other agent, and perhaps the rest of this note, though akin to what has gone before, may be more conveniently read at a later stage. The builder paid the differential of V over the differential of x1 by delta x1 for the last element of the labour of the first group because that was its net product. If directed to building villas, it brought him the differential of H over the differential of beta multiplied by the differential of beta over the differential of x1 by delta x1 as special receipts. Now, if P be the price per unit which he received for an amount beta of villa accommodation, and therefore P beta the price which he received for the whole amount beta, and if we put for shortness the change in beta in place of the differential of beta over the differential of x1 by delta x1, the increase of villa accommodation due to the additional element of labour, delta x1, then the net product we are seeking is not P by the change in beta, but P by the change in beta plus beta by the change in P, where the change in P is a negative quantity, and is the fall in demand price caused by the increase in the amount of villa accommodation offered by the builder. We have to make some study of the relative magnitudes of these two elements, P by the change in beta and beta by the change in P. If the builder monopolised the supply of villas, beta would represent the total supply of them, and if it happened that the elasticity of the demand for them was less than unity, when the amount beta was offered, then by increasing his supply he would diminish his total receipts, and P by the change in beta plus beta by the change in P would be a negative quantity. But of course, he would not have allowed the production to go just up to an amount at which the demand would be thus inelastic. The margin which he chose for his reduction would certainly be one in which the negative quantity beta by the change in P is less than P by the change in beta, but not necessarily so much less that it may be neglected in comparison. This is a dominant fact in the theory of monopolies discussed in Book 5, Chapter 14. It is dominant also in the case of any producer who has a limited trade connection which he cannot quickly enlarge. If his customers have already as much of his wares as they care for, so that the elasticity of their demand is temporarily less than unity, he might lose by putting on an additional man to work for him, even though that man would work for nothing. This fear of temporarily spoiling a man's special market is a leading influence in many problems of value relating to short periods, and especially in those periods of commercial depression and in those regulations of trade associations, formal and informal, which we shall have to study in the second volume. There is an allied difficulty in the case of commodities of which the expense of production diminish rapidly with every increase in the amount produced. But here the causes that govern the limits of production are so complex that it seems hardly worthwhile to attempt to translate them into mathematical language. When, however, we are studying the action of an individual undertaker with a view of illustrating the normal action of the causes which govern the general demand for the several agents of production, it seems clear that we should avoid cases of this kind. We should leave their particular features to be analysed separately in special discussions and take our normal illustration from a case in which the individual is only one of many who have efficient, if indirect, access to the market. If beta by the change in P be numerically equal to P by the change in beta, where beta is the whole production in a large market, and an individual undertaker produce beta dash, a thousandth part of beta, then the increased receipt from putting on an additional man is P by the change in beta dash, which is the same as P by the change in beta, and the deduction to be made from it is only beta dash by the change in P, which is a thousandth part of beta by the change in P, and may be neglected. For the purpose, therefore, of illustrating a part of the general action of the laws of distribution, we are justified in speaking of the value of the net product of the marginal work of any agent of production as the amount of that net product taken at the normal selling value of the product, that is, as P by the change in beta. It may be noticed that none of these difficulties are dependent upon the system of division of labour and work for payment, though they are brought into prominence by the habit of measuring efforts and satisfactions by price, which is associated with it. Robinson Crusoe, erecting a building for himself, would not find that an addition of a thousandth part to his previous accommodation increased his comfort by a thousandth part. What he added might be of the same character with the rest, but if one counted it in at the same rate of real value to him, one would have to reckon for the fact that the new part made of the old somewhat less urgent need, of somewhat lower real value to him. On the other hand, the law of increasing return might render it very difficult for him to assign its true net product to a given half-hour's work. For instance, suppose that some small herbs, grateful as condiment and easily portable, grow in a part of his island, which it takes half a day to visit, and he has gone there to get small batches at a time. Afterwards, he gives a whole day, having no important use, to which he can put less than half a day, and comes back with 10 times as great a load as before. We cannot then separate the return of the last half hour from the rest. Our only plan is to take the whole day as a unit and compare its return of satisfaction with those of days spent in other ways. And in the modern system of industry, we have the similar but more difficult task of taking, for some purposes, the whole of a process of production as a single unit. It would be possible to extend the scope of such systems of equations as we have been considering, and to increase their detail until they embraced, within themselves, the whole of the demand side of the problem of distribution. But while a mathematical illustration of the mode of action of a definite set of causes may be complete in itself, and strictly accurate within its clearly defined limits, it is otherwise with any attempt to grasp the whole of a complex problem of real life, or even any considerable part of it in a series of equations. For many important considerations, especially those connected with the manifold influences of the element of time, do not lend themselves easily to mathematical expression. They must either be omitted altogether or clipped and pruned till they resemble the conventional birds and animals of decorative art, and hence arises a tendency towards assigning wrong proportions to economic forces, those elements being most emphasized, which lend themselves most easily to analytical methods. No doubt this danger is inherent in every application not only of mathematical analysis, but of analysis of any kind to the problems of real life. It is a danger which more than any other, the economist must have in mind at every turn, but to avoid it altogether would be to abandon the chief means of scientific progress, and in discussions written specially for mathematical readers, it is no doubt right to be very bold in the search for wide generalizations. In such discussions, it might be right, for instance, to regard H as the sum of total satisfactions, and V as the sum total of dissatisfactions, efforts, sacrifices, etc., which accrue to a community from economic causes. To simplify the notion of the action of these causes by assumptions similar to those which are involved, more or less consciously, in the various forms of the doctrine that the constant drift of these causes is towards the attainment of the maximum satisfaction in the net aggregate for the community, or, in other words, that there is a constant tendency to make H minus V a maximum for society as a whole. On this plan, the resulting differential equations of the same class as those which we have been discussing will be interpreted to represent value as governed in every field of economics by the balancing of groups of utilities against groups of disutilities, of groups of satisfactions against groups of real costs. Such discussions have their place, but it is not in a treatise such as the present, in which mathematics are used only to express in terse and more precise language those methods of analysis and reasoning which ordinary people adopt, more or less consciously, in the affairs of everyday life. It may indeed be admitted that such discussions have some points of resemblance to the method of analysis applied in Book 3 to the total utility of particular commodities. The difference between the two cases is mainly one of degree, but it is of a degree so great as practically to amount to a difference of kind. For in the former case, we take each commodity by itself and with reference to a particular market, and we take careful account of the circumstances of the consumers at the time and place under consideration. Thus, we follow, though perhaps with more careful precautions, the practice of ministers of finance and of the common man when discussing financial policy. We note that a few commodities are consumed mainly by the rich, and that, in consequence, their real total utilities are less than is suggested by the money measures of those utilities. But we assume, with the rest of the world, that as a rule, and in the absence of special causes to the contrary, the real total utilities of two commodities that are mainly consumed by the rich stand to one another in about the same relation as their money measures do, and that the same is true of commodities the consumption of which is divided out among rich and middle class and poor in similar proportions. Such estimates are but rough approximations, but each particular difficulty, each source of possible error, is pushed into prominence by the definiteness of our phrases. We introduce no assumptions that are not latent in the practice of ordinary life, while we attempt no task that is not grappled with in a rougher fashion, but yet to good purpose in the practice of ordinary life. We introduce no new assumptions, and we bring into clear light those which cannot be avoided. But though this is possible when dealing with particular commodities with reference to particular markets, it does not seem possible with regard to the innumerable economic elements that come within the all-embracing net of the doctrine of maximum satisfaction. The forces of supply are especially heterogeneous and complex. They include an infinite variety of efforts and sacrifices, direct and indirect, on the part of people in all varieties of industrial grades. And if there were no other hindrance to giving a concrete interpretation to the doctrine, a fatal obstacle would be found in its latent assumption that the cost of rearing children and preparing them for their work can be measured in the same way as the cost of erecting a machine. For reasons similar to those given in this typical case, our mathematical notes will cover less and less ground as the complexity of the subjects discussed in the text increases. A few of those that follow relate to monopolies, which present some sides singularly open to direct analytical treatment, but the majority of the remainder will be occupied with illustrations of joint and composite demand and supply, which have much in common with the substance of this note, while the last of that series, Note 21, goes a little way towards a general survey of the problem of distribution and exchange, without reference to the element of time, but only so far as to make sure that the mathematical illustrations used point towards a system of equations, which are neither more nor less in number than the unknowns introduced into them. Note 14 bis. In the diagrams of Chapter 6 of Book 5, the supply curves are all inclined positively, and in our mathematical versions of them, we shall suppose the marginal expense of production to be determined with a definiteness that does not exist in real life. We shall take no account of the time required for developing a representative business with the internal and external economies of production on a large scale, and we shall ignore all those difficulties connected with the law of increasing return which are discussed in Book 5, Chapter 12. To adopt any other course would lead us to mathematical complexities which, though perhaps not without their use, would be unsuitable for a treatise of this kind. The discussions, therefore, in this and the following notes must be regarded as sketches rather than complete studies. Let the factors of production of a commodity A be A1, A2, etc., and let their supply equations be Y equals phi1 of x, Y equals phi2 of x, etc. Let the number of units of them required for the production of x units of A be m1x, m2x, respectively, where m1, m2 are generally not constants, but functions of x. Then the supply equation of A is y equals phi of x equals m1 phi1 of m1x plus m2 phi2 of m2x, and so on, which is equivalent to the sum of m phi of mx. Let y equals function of x be the demand equation for the finished commodity. Then the derived demand equation for AR, the rth factor, is y equals function of x minus phi of x minus mr phi r of mrx. But in this equation, y is the price not of one unit of the factor, but of m units. And to get an equation expressed in terms of fixed units, let eta be the price of one unit, and let xi equal mrx. Then n equals 1 over mr multiplied by y, and the equation becomes eta equals function r of xi equals 1 over mr by function of 1 over mr xi minus phi of 1 over mr xi minus mr theta r of xi. If mr is a function of x, say, equals psi r of x, then x must be determined in terms of xi by the equation xi equals x psi r of x, so that mr can be written chi r of xi. Substituting this, we have eta expressed as a function of xi. The supply equation for AR is simply eta equals phi r of xi. Note 15. Let the demand equation for knives be y equals f of x, 1. Let the supply equation for knives be y equals phi of x, 2. And let that for handles be y equals phi1 of x, 3. And that for blades be y equals phi2 of x, 4. Then the demand equation for handles is y equals function 1 of x equals function of x minus phi2 of x, 5. The measure of elasticity for 5 is minus xf-1 of x over f1 of x to the power minus 1. That is minus xf- of x minus x phi-2 of x over f1 of x to the power minus 1. That is minus xf- of x over f of x multiplied by f of x over f1 of x plus x phi-2 of x over f1 of x to the power minus 1. This will be the smaller, the more fully the following conditions are satisfied. 1. That minus xf dash of x over f of x, which is necessarily positive, be large, i.e. that the elasticity of the demand for knives be small. 2. That phi dash 2 of x be positive and large, i.e. that the supply price for blades should increase rapidly with an increase and diminish rapidly with a diminution of the amount supplied. And 3, f of x over f1 of x should be large, that is, that the price of handles should be but a small part of the price of knives. A similar but more complex inquiry leads to substantially the same results when the units of the factors of production are not fixed but vary, as in the preceding note. Note 16. Suppose that m bushels of hops are used in making a gallon of ale of a certain kind, of which in equilibrium x dash gallons are sold at a price y dash equals function of x dash. Let m be changed into m plus the change in m, and as a result, when x dash gallons are still offered for sale, let them find purchasers at a price y dash plus the change in y dash. Then the change in y dash over the change in m represents the marginal demand price for hops. If it is greater than their supply price, it will be to the interest of the brewers to put more hops into the ale. Or to put the case more generally, let y equal function of x and m. Y equal phi of x and m be the demand and supply equations for beer, x being the number of gallons and m the number of bushels of hops in each gallon. Then function of x and m minus phi of x and m equals the excessive demand over supply price. In equilibrium, this is of course 0, but if it were possible to make it a positive sum by varying m, the change would be affected. Therefore, assuming that there is no perceptible change in the expense of making the beer other than what results from the increased amount of hops, the differential of f over the differential of m equals the differential of phi over the differential of m. The first represents the marginal demand price, and the second, the marginal supply price of hops, and these two are therefore equal. This method is, of course, capable of being extended to cases in which there are concurrent variations in two or more factors of production. Note 17. Suppose that a thing, whether a finished commodity or a factor of production, is distributed between two uses, so that the total amount x of the part devoted to the first use is x1, and that devoted to the second use is x2. Let y equal phi of x be the total supply equation. Y equals f1 of x1 and y equals f2 of x2 be the demand equations for its first and second uses. Then in equilibrium, the three unknowns x, x1 and x2 are determined by the three equations f1 of x1 equals f2 of x2 equals phi of x. x1 plus x2 equals x. Next, suppose that it is desired to obtain separately the relations of demand and supply of the thing in its first use, on the supposition that, whatever perturbations there may be in its first use, its demand and supply for the second use remains in equilibrium, i.e. that its demand price for the second use is equal to its supply price for the total amount that is actually produced, i.e. f2 of x2 equals phi of x1 plus x2, always. From this equation, we can determine x2 in terms of x1, and therefore x in terms of x1. And therefore we can write phi of x equals psi of x1. Thus, the supply equation for the thing in its first use becomes y equals psi of x1, and this, with the already known equation y equals f1 of x1, gives the relations required. Note 18. Let A1, A2, etc. be joint products, M1x, M2x, of them severally being produced as the result of x units of their joint process of production, for which the supply equation is y equals phi of x.
All right, thank you, Alfred. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to end this seance by performing a banishing ritual. Spirit be gone! That's right, till I call you forth again from the fiery depths of hell. All right, hey, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so this is the second half of the big show. Call it this interactive show, by the way. Always welcome calls. comments, whether they be on the Blog Talk Radio site or the YouTube site or the shout out to my special friend, Citizen Kane. He always leaves me some really valuable suggestions on the YouTube site. And let's see here also, on the blog. The blog, by the way, is charleslamson.blogspot.com. And that podcast, you can find archives of the podcast there. But yeah, if you want to go to the Blog Talk channel, that's pretty easy to find as well. It's just blogtalkradio.com/Charles Lamson. So, all right. Like I said, though, caller lines wide open. You want to call in, be a part of the big show, please feel free. That number is 657-383-1825. 657-383-1825. All right. We were talking about the external environment as related to managing for competitive advantage. The behavioral sciences, what have you. The behavioral sciences, I guess, in a business. Okay, we're related to a business organization. And we were talking about the external environment. So I'd like to pick up where we left off there and talk more about the external environment. And more specifically, we're going to start off with the competitive environment. So, all organizations are affected by the general components of the macro environment we discussed in the last section, the last show. Which, by the way, like I said, the archives are all there. Just look for economic managing for competitive advantage, part 1. So, the archives are there either on the Blog Talk page or the YouTube clip, or you can just go to the blog, charleslamson.blogspot.com. Anyway, that being said, let's start from the top. All organizations are affected. The competitive environment. All organizations are affected by the general components of the macro environment we discussed in the last section, in the last show. Each organization also functions in a closer, more immediate competitive environment. The competitive environment includes the specific organizations with which the organization interacts. The competitive environment includes rivalry among current competitors, threat of new entrants, threat of substitutes, power of suppliers, and power of customers. By the way, I created some really good exhibits and figures and visual representations of what I'm talking about. If you want to check those out, just go to the blog, charleslamson.blogspot.com. It's all there. Okay, so this model I'm discussing was originally by Michael Porter, a Harvard professor and a noted authority on strategic management. According to Porter, successful managers do more than simply react to the environment. They act in ways that actually shape or change the organization's environment. In strategic decision-making, Porter's model is an excellent method for analyzing the competitive environment in order to adapt or influence the nature of competition. It's all about being proactive, ladies and gentlemen. Be the change you want to see in the world. Okay, competitors. Among the various components of the competitive environment, competitors within the industry must first deal with one another. When organizations compete for the same customers and try to win market share at the other's expense, all must react to anticipate their competitors' actions. The first question to consider is, who is the competition? Sometimes answers are obvious. Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola and PepsiCo are competitors, as are the big three automakers, General Motors, Ford, and Daimler Chrysler. But sometimes organizations focus too exclusively on traditional rivalries and miss the emerging ones. Historically, Sears and Roebuck focused on its competition with J.C. Penney. However, Sears' real competitors were Kmart and Walmart at the low end, Target in the middle, Nordstrom at the high end, and a variety of catalogers such as LL Bean and Eddie Bauer. Thus, as the first step in understanding their competitive environment, organizations must identify their competitors. Competitors may include one, small domestic firms, especially their entry into tiny premium markets. Two, overseas firms, especially their efforts to solidify positions and small niches, a traditional Japanese tactic. Three, big new domestic companies exploring new markets. Four, strong regional competitors. And five, unusual entries such as internet shopping. Once competitors have been identified, the next step is to analyze how they compete. Competitors use tactics such as price reductions, new product introductions, and advertising campaigns to gain advantage over their rivals. It is essential to understand what competitors are doing when you are holding your own strategy. Competition is most intense when there are many direct competitors, including foreign contenders, when industry growth is slow, and when the product or service cannot be differentiated in some way. New high-growth industries offer enormous opportunities for profits. When an industry matures and growth slows, profits drop. Then, intense competition causes an industry shakeout. Weaker companies are eliminated, and the strong companies survive. Threat of new entrants. New entrants into an industry compete with established companies. If many factors prevent new companies from entering the industry, the threat to established firms is less serious. If there are few such barriers to entry, the threat of new entrants is more serious. Some major barriers to entry are government policy, capital requirements, brand identification, cost disadvantages, and distribution channels. The government can limit or prevent entry, as occurs when the FDA forbids a new drug entrant. Some industries, such as trucking and liquor retailing, are regulated. More subtle government controls operate in such fields, such as mining and ski area development. Patents are also entry barriers. When a patent expires, other companies can then enter the market. For example, when the pharmaceutical firm Eli Lilly and Company's patent on its antidepressant drug Prozac expired, it lost its U.S. monopoly on the drug and its sales plunged. Barr Laboratories Inc. won the right to be the exclusive seller of a generic version of Prozac for 6 months. After that, other copycats flooded the market, eroding Barr's sales of the drug. Other barriers are less formal but can have the same effect. Capital requirements may be so high that companies will not risk or try to raise such large amounts of money. Brand identification forces new entrants to spend heavily to overcome customer loyalty. The cost advantages established companies hold due to large size, favorable locations, existing assets, and so forth also can be formidable entry barriers. Finally, existing competitors may have such tight distribution channels that new entrants have difficulty getting their products or services to customers. For example, established food products already have supermarket shelf space. New entrants must displace existing products with promotions, price breaks, intensive selling, and other tactics. Threat of substitutes. Technological advances and economic efficiencies are among the ways that firms can develop substitutes for existing products. For example, although Southwest Airlines has developed strong rivalries with other airlines, it also competes as a substitute with bus companies such as Greyhound and rental car companies such as Avis. Southwest has gotten its cost base down to such a low point that it is now cheaper to fly from Los Angeles to Phoenix than it is to take a bus or rent a car. Thus, this particular example shows that substitute products or services can limit another industry's revenue potential. Companies in those industries are likely to suffer growth and earnings problems unless they improve quality or launch aggressive marketing campaigns. In addition to current substitutes, companies need to think about potential substitutes that may be viable in the near future. For example, as alternatives to fossil fuels, experts suggest that nuclear fusion, solar power, and wind energy may prove useful one day. The advantages promised by each of these technologies are many. Inexhaustible fuel supplies, electricity too cheap to meter, zero emissions, universal public acceptance, and so on. Yet, while they may look good on paper and give us a warm, fuzzy feeling inside, they often come up short in terms of economics and/or technical viability. Suppliers. Okay, well, all right, suppliers. Organizations must acquire resources from their environment and convert those resources into products or services to sell. Suppliers provide the resources needed for production and may come in the form of people supplied by trade schools and universities, raw materials supplied by producers, wholesalers, and distributors, information supplied by researchers and consulting firms, and financial capital supplied by banks and other sources. But suppliers are important to an organization for reasons that go beyond the resources they provide. Suppliers can raise their wages or provide poor quality goods and services. Labor unions can go on strike or demand higher wages. Workers may produce defective work. Powerful suppliers then can reduce an organization's profits, particularly if the organization cannot pass on price increases to its customers. One particular noteworthy set of suppliers to some industries is the international labor unions. Although unionization in the United States has dropped to about 10% of the private labor force, labor unions are still particularly powerful in industries such as steel, autos, and transportation. Even the Screen Actors Guild, the union representing workers in the entertainment industry, exerts considerable power on behalf of its members. For example, Tiger Woods was fined $100,000 for making a non-union Buick commercial during a strike by the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists. Labor unions represent and protect the interests of their members with respect to hiring, wages, working conditions, job security, and due process appeals. Historically, the relationship between management and labor unions has been adversarial. However, the relationship between management and labor unions, however, both sides seem to realize that to increase productivity and competitiveness, management and labor must work together in collaborative relationships. Troubled labor relations can create higher costs and productivity declines and eventually lead to layoffs. Organizations are at a disadvantage if they become overly dependent on any powerful supplier. A supplier is powerful if the buyer has few other sources of supply or if the supplier has many other buyers. For example, if computer companies can go only to Microsoft for software or only to Intel for microchips, those suppliers can exert a great deal of pressure. In many cases, companies build up switching costs. Switching costs are fixed costs buyers face if they change suppliers. For example, once a buyer learns how to operate a supplier's equipment, such as computer software, the buyer faces both economic and psychological costs in changing to a new supplier. Choosing the right supplier is an important strategic decision. Suppliers can affect manufacturing time, product quality, and inventory levels. The relationship between suppliers and the organization is changing in some companies. The close supplier relationship has become a new model for many organizations, such as Ford Motor, that are using a just-in-time manufacturing approach. Customers purchase the products or services an organization offers. Without customers, a company will not survive. You are a final consumer when you buy a McDonald's hamburger or a pair of jeans from a retailer at the mall. Intermediate consumers buy raw materials or wholesale products and then sell to final customers. Intermediate customers usually make more purchases than individual final consumers do. Examples of intermediate customers include retailers who buy clothes from wholesalers and manufacturers' representatives before selling them to their customers, and industrial buyers who buy raw materials such as chemicals before converting them into final product. Like suppliers, customers are important to organizations for reasons other than the money they provide for goods and services. Consumer customers can demand lower prices, higher quality, unique product specifications, or better service. They also can play competitors against one another, as occurs when a car customer or a purchasing agent collect different offers and negotiate for the best price. Customer service means giving customers what they want or need, the way they want it the first time. This usually depends on the speed and dependability with which an organization can deliver its products or services. Actions and attitudes that mean excellent customer service include the following: speed of filling and delivering normal orders, willingness to meet emergency needs, merchandise delivered in good condition, readiness to take back defective goods and resupply quickly, availability of installation and repair services and parts, service charges, that is, whether services are free or priced separately. Moving on. So, in all businesses, services, as well as manufacturing, Strategies that emphasize good customer service provide a critical competitive advantage. The organization is at a disadvantage if it depends too heavily on powerful customers. Customers are powerful if they make large purchases or if they can easily find alternative places to buy. If you are the largest customer of a firm and there are other firms from which you can buy, you have power over that firm, and you are likely to be able to negotiate with it successfully. Your firm's biggest customers, especially if they can buy from other sources, will have the greatest negotiating power over you. Moving on. Yeah, but anyway, like I said, if you want to check out where I'm getting the source material from, it's on my blog, and you just go to charleslamson.blogspot.com. Look on the right-hand side, and all my work is divided up into years. This was, so you just go back to 2019, and this was in the 29. Go back to the month of October in 2019, and look for managing for competitive advantage. And there's all the text basically that I'm spewing forth. And like I said, there's a lot of like charts, diagrams, and exhibits and stuff there too that I created. So there's also a lot of other cool kinds of art and photography and images to look at, YouTube clips. Some are relevant with the material, some are not. Some are just for infotainment. But I highly recommend checking it out. charleslamson.blogspot.com, the greatest blog of all time. Okay, managerial decision making. The stages of decision making. The ideal decision making process moves through 6 stages at companies that have institutionalized the process. These stages are intended to answer the following questions. What do we want? What do we want to change? What's preventing us from reaching the desired state? How could we make the change? What's the best way to do it? Are we following the plan? And how well did it work out? More formally, decision makers should 1. Identify and diagnose the problem. 2. Generate alternative solutions. 3. Evaluate alternatives. 4. Make the choice. 5. Implement the decision. And 6. Evaluate the decision. Which brings us to identifying and diagnosing the problem. The first stage in the decision-making process is to recognize that a problem exists and must be solved. Typically, a manager realizes some discrepancy between the current state, the way things are, and the desired state, the way things ought to be. Such discrepancies, say in organizational or unit performance, may be detected by comparing current performance against 1. Past performance, 2. The current performance of other organizations or units, or 3. Future expected performance as determined by plans and forecasts. Recognizing that a problem exists is only the beginning of this stage. The decision maker also must want to do something about it and must believe that the resources and abilities necessary for solving the problem exist. Then the decision maker must dig in deeper and attempt to diagnose the true cause of the problem, symptoms that surfaced. Cause of the problem, symptoms that surfaced. Okay. For example, a sales manager knows that sales have dropped drastically if he is leaving the company soon or believes the decreased sales value is due to the economy, which he cannot do anything about. He will not take action. But if he does try to solve the problem, he should not automatically reprimand his sales staff, add new people, or increase the advertising budget. He must analyze why sales are down and then develop a solution appropriate to his analysis. Asking why of yourself and others is essential to understanding the real problem. Useful questions to ask and answer in this stage include: Is there a difference between what is actually happening and what should be happening? How can you describe the deviation as specifically as possible? What is or are the cause or causes of the deviation? What specific goals should be met? Which of these goals are absolutely critical to the success of the decision? Okay, this brings us to, so then once you answer these questions, then this will bring us to generating alternative solutions. These questions will help you do that. So in the second stage, problem diagnosis is linked to the development of alternative courses of action aimed at solving the problem. Managers generate at least some alternative solutions based on past experiences. Solutions range from ready-made to custom-made. Decision makers who search for ready-made solutions use ideas they have tried before or follow the advice of others who have faced similar problems. Custom-made solutions, by contrast, must be designed for specific problems. This technique requires combining ideas into new creative solutions. For example, the Sony Walkman was created by combining two existing products, earphones and a tape player. Potentially, custom-made solutions can be devised for any challenge in later sections, we'll discuss how to generate creative ideas. If you're generally not a creative sort, don't worry. These ideas are simpler than you might think. Importantly, there are potentially many more alternatives available than managers may realize. For example, what would you do if one of your competitors reduced profit prices? An obvious choice would be to reduce your own prices. But when American Airlines, Northwest Airlines, and other carriers engaged in fare wars in the early 1990s, the result was a record volume of air travel and record losses for the industry. Fortunately, cutting prices in response to a competitor's price cuts is not the only alternative available, although sometimes it is assumed to be. If one of your competitors cuts prices, do not automatically respond with the initial obvious response. Generate multiple options and thoroughly forecast the consequences of these different options. Options other than price cuts include non-price responses, such as emphasizing consumer risks to low-priced products, building awareness of your product's features and overall quality, and communicating your cost advantage to your competitors so they realize that they cannot win a price war. Winn-Dixie used that last strategy to its advantage against Food Lion, and the stores stopped competing on price. If you do decide to cut your price, and as a last resort, do it fast. If you do it slowly, your competitors will gain sales in the meantime, and it may embolden them to employ the same tactic again in the future. Evaluating alternatives. The third stage involves determining the value or adequacy of the alternatives that were generated. Which solution will be the best? Too often, alternatives are evaluated with little thought or logic. Fundamental to this process is to predict the consequences that will occur if the various options are put into effect. Managers should consider several types of consequences. Of course, they must attempt to predict the effect on financial or other performance measures. But there are other, less clear-cut consequences to address. Decisions set a precedent. Will this precedent be a help or a hindrance in the future? Also, the success or failure of the decision will go into the track records of those involved in making it. Refer again to your original goals defined in the first stage. Which goals does each alternative meet and fail to meet? Which alternatives are most acceptable to you and to other important stakeholders? If several alternatives may solve the problem, which can be implemented at the lowest cost? If no alternative achieves all your goals, perhaps you can combine two or more of the best ones. Key questions are: is our information about alternatives complete and current? If not, can we get more and better information? Does the alternative meet our primary objectives? What problem could we have if we implement the alternative? Of course, results cannot be forecast with perfect accuracy, but sometimes decision makers can build in safeguards against an uncertain future by considering the potential consequences of several different scenarios. Then they can generate contingency plans, which are alternative courses of action that can be implemented based on how the future unfolds. For example, scenario planners making decisions about the future might consider four alternative views of the future state of the U.S. economy. One, an economic boom with 5 to 6% annual growth, and the United States much stronger than its global competitors. Two, a moderately strong economy with 2 to 3% growth, and the United States pulling out of a recession. Three, a pessimistic outlook with no growth, rising unemployment and recession. Or four, a worst case scenario with global depression, massive unemployment, and widespread social unrest. Got a plan for all of those scenarios. Some scenarios will seem more likely than others, and some may seem highly improbable. Ultimately, one of the scenarios, so it's like the old saying goes: hope for the best, plan for the worst, and hope for the best. So, ultimately, one of the scenarios will prove to be more accurate than the others. The process of considering multiple scenarios raises important what-if questions for decision makers and highlights the need for preparedness and contingency plans. So, as you listen to this, right now, what economic scenario do you see unfolding? What are the important current events and trends? What scenarios could evolve 6 or 8 years from now? How will you prepare? Making the choice. Once you have considered the possible consequences of your options, it's time to make your decision. Important concepts here are maximizing, satisficing, and optimizing. Maximizing is making the best possible decision. The maximizing decision realizes the greatest possible consequences and the fewest negative consequences. In other words, maximizing results in the greatest benefit at the lowest cost, with the largest expected total return. Maximizing requires searching thoroughly for a complete range of alternatives, carefully assessing each alternative, comparing one to another, and then choosing or creating the very best. Satisficing is choosing the first option that is minimally acceptable or adequate. The choice appears to meet a targeted goal or criterion. When you satisfice, you compare your choice against your goal, not against other options. Satisficing means that a search for alternative stops at the first one that is okay. Commonly, people do not expend the time or energy to gather more information. Instead, They make the expedient decision based on readily available information. Satisficing is sometimes a result of laziness. Other times, there is no other option because time is short. Information is unavailable, or other constraints make it impossible to maximize. Let's say you are purchasing new equipment and your goal is to avoid spending too much money. You would be maximizing if you checked out all your options and their prices, and then bought the cheapest one that met your performance requirements. But you would be satisficing if you bought the first one you found that was within your budget and failed to look for less expensive options. Optimizing means that you achieve the best possible balance among several goals. Perhaps in purchasing equipment, you are interested in quality and durability as well as price. So instead of buying the cheapest price of equipment that works, you buy the one with the combination of attributes, even though there may be options that are better on the price criterion and others that are better on the price criterion and others that are better on the quality and durability criteria. The same idea applies to achieving business goals. One marketing strategy could maximize sales, while a different strategy might maximize profit. An optimizing strategy is the one that achieves the best balance among multiple goals. Okay, I'm going to take a quick break. Be right back after these easy listening sounds from the monks of Tibet. Spirit be gone. All right. So, those who, okay, we're talking about implementing the decision. Just to get us up to speed with where I was, going to take this from the top. Let's see. I don't remember. The decision-making process does not end once a choice is made. Implementing the decision. The chosen alternative must be implemented. Sometimes the people involved in making the choice must put it into effect. At other times, they delegate the responsibility for implementation to others, such as when a top management team changes a policy or operating procedure and has operational managers carry out the change. Those who implement the decision must understand the choice and why it was made. They also must be committed to its successful implementation. These needs can be met by involving those people in the early stages of the decision process. At Steelcase, the world's largest manufacturer of office furniture, new product ideas are put through simultaneous design, engineering, and marketing scrutiny. This is in contrast to an approach in which designers design and the concept is later relayed to other departments for implementation. In the latter case, full understanding and total commitment of all departments are less likely. Managers should plan implementation carefully. Adequate planning requires several steps. Number one of these steps of plan implementation that managers should know is number one, determine how things will go when the decision is fully operational. Two, chronologically order, perhaps with a flow diagram, the steps necessary to achieve a fully optional decision. Three, list the resources and activities required to implement each step. Four, estimate the time needed for each step. Five, assign responsibility to for each step to specific individuals. Decision makers should assume that things will not go smoothly during implementation. It is very useful to take a little extra time to identify potential problems and identify potential opportunities. Then you can take action to prevent problems and also be ready to seize on unexpected opportunities. Useful questions are: what problems could this action cause? What can we do to prevent the problems? What unintended benefits or opportunities could arise? How can we make sure they happened? How can we be ready to act when the opportunities come? Much of this analysis is concerned with the implementation issues: how to implement strategy, allocate resources, organize for results, lead and motivate people, manage change, and so on. View these upcoming sections, or when you listen to these upcoming sections, I want you to view them from that perspective and learn as much as you can about how to implement properly. Evaluating the decision. The final stage in the decision-making process is evaluating the decision. This means collecting information on how well the decision is working, quantifiable goals, a 20% increase in sales, a 95% reduction in accidents, 100% on-time deliveries can be set before the solution to the problem is implemented. Then objective data can be gathered to accurately determine the success or failure of the decision. Decision evaluation is useful whether the feedback is positive or negative. Feedback that suggests the decision is working implies that the decision should be continued and perhaps applied elsewhere in the organization. Negative feedback indicating failure means that either one, implementation will require more time, resources, effort, or thought, or two, the decision was a bad one. And so, yeah, that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I want to give a very special shout out of thanks to my biggest fan, and that is Citizen Kane. He always weighs in and gives me good feedback. So I always like reading what he has to say. He has a lot of good suggestions for the direction the show should go in. So I recommend go check out the YouTube channel. You can see all of his comments there. He's a very bright man or woman. I don't know. It's a very mysterious person. So if the decision appears inappropriate, it's back to the drawing board. Then the process cycles back to the first stage. I guess you could call it, he's kind of like the producer of the show. Yeah, he's my producer. He's always got a lot of good feedback and suggestions. All right, so if the decision appears inappropriate, it's back to the drawing board. Then the process cycles back to the first stage redefinition of the problem. The decision-making process begins anew, preferably with more information, new suggestions, and an approach that attempts to eliminate the mistakes made the first time around. Moving on from town to town, like a drifter, a gypsy. Excuse me, I mean Romany. I know gypsy is, I guess, hate speech now for the Romany people, Romany Americans. I apologize to all the Romani Americans out there and Romanis worldwide. This is a worldwide broadcast, after all. That being said, got about 15 minutes left in the big show. If you want to let your voice be heard by millions of people worldwide, feel free to call in. That number is 657 383 1825. 657 383 1825. Call in, let your voice be heard. It'll be awesome. Planning and strategy. Levels of planning. All right, so in an earlier section, you learned about the three major types of managers. You got top level, strategic managers, middle level, tactical managers, and frontline, operational managers. Because planning is an important management function, managers at all three levels use it. However, the scope and activities of the planning process at each level of the organization often differ. Strategic planning. Strategic planning involves making decisions about the organization's long-term goals and strategies. Strategic plans have a strong external orientation and cover major portions of the organization. Senior executives are responsible for the development and execution of the strategic plan, although they usually do not formulate or implement the entire plan personally. Strategic goals are major targets or end results that really relate to the long-term survival, value, and growth of the organization. Strategic managers, top-level managers, usually establish goals that reflect both effectiveness, providing appropriate outputs, and efficiency, a high ratio of outputs to inputs. Typical strategic goals include various measures of return to shareholders, profitability, quantity and quality of outputs, market share, productivity, and contribution to society. A strategy is a pattern of actions and resource allocations designed to achieve the goals of the organization. The strategy an organization implements is an attempt to match the skills and resources of the organization to the opportunities found in the external environment. That is, every organization has certain strengths and weaknesses. The actions or strategies the organization implements should be directed toward building strength in the areas that satisfy the wants and needs of customers and other key factors in the organization's external environment. Also, some organizations may implement strategies that change or influence the external environment. Tactical and operational planning. Once the organization's strategic goals and plans are identified, they become the basis of planning done by mid-level and frontline managers. Goals and plans become more specific and involve shorter periods of time as planning moves from the strategic level to the operational level. Tactical planning translates broad strategic goals and plans into specific goals and plans that are relevant to a definite portion of the organization, often a functional area like marketing or human resources. Tactical plans focus on the major actions a unit must take to fulfill its part of the strategic plan. Operational planning identifies the specific procedures and processes required at lower levels of the organization. Frontline managers usually develop plans for very short periods of time and focus on routine tasks such as production runs, delivery schedules, and human resources requirements. Linking tactical, operational, and strategic planning. The organization's strategic, tactical, and operational goals and plans must be consistent and mutually supportive. Whole Foods Market, for example, links its critical tactical and operational planning directly to its strategic planning. The firm describes itself on its website as a mission-driven company that aims to set the standards for excellence for food retailers. The firm measures its success in fulfilling its mission by customer satisfaction, team member excellence and happiness, return on capital investment, improvement in the state of the environment, and local and larger community support. Whole Foods' strategic goal is to sell the highest quality products that also offer high value for their customers. Its operational goals focus on ingredients, freshness, taste, nutritive value, safety, and appearance that meet or exceed its customers' expectations, including guaranteeing product satisfaction. Tactical goals include store environments that are inviting, fun. I quote, this is from their mission statement. Tactical goals include environments that are inviting, fun, unique, informed, comfortable, attractive, nurturing, and educational, and safe and inviting work environment for its employees. In a nutshell, Whole Foods' operational goals focus on providing products that satisfy its customers. Starbucks has built its strategy of growth and profitability. That right there, ladies and gentlemen, is a little example of just a perfect mission statement. If you want to keep it short, sweet, and to the point, it would be something like this. Whole Foods, you'd say you're opening a store, Joe's Fresh food, and you want to need a mission statement to sort of guide you in the right direction. This is it right here. Operational goals focus on providing products that satisfy its customers. If you're creating products that satisfy your customers, then hey, you can. That's a very powerful thing to work with. You can create a lifetime relationship. It's all about relationship marketing, and with that lifetime relationship, it creates good things and goodwill for everyone involved. And one can never get enough goodwill in the business community. Starbucks has built its strategy of growth and profitability around the notion of excellent service and ambiance. No longer is coffee just a morning ritual. It has evolved into something with a far more existential quality. We are trying to create a third place for our customers, says former chairman Howard Schultz. A third place is a place between the home and work where people can come to get their own personal time out, their respite, meet with friends, have a sense of gathering. A key tactical planning issue for Starbucks is linking its obsession with service and quality to a healthy bottom line. Excellent service attracts new customers and keeps loyal customers coming back. Excellent service and quality depend on highly efficient processes for brewing coffee and terrific customer relations. These processes, in turn, are carried out by a dedicated and well-trained workforce. According to Schultz, we've never. Now, I usually don't, pump up company. I try to steer away from pumping up companies too much. My show, then I feel like I'm basically doing an advertisement for them, or giving them free PR. But in this case, it is a good example of what I'm talking about. So taking it from the top, these processes are in turn carried out by a dedicated and well-trained workforce. According to Schultz, so I just want to let you know, I'm not getting paid for this, but it is just a good example. According to Schultz, we've never viewed coffee as a commodity, and we've never viewed our people as commodities. I think the foundation of our success is the passionate commitment we have to the quality of coffee that we buy and roast, and making sure that the people in our company are not simply a line item. We view our people as business partners. The company's Beanstalk program gives all employees the opportunity to own stock in the company. Okay, once again, this might be dated. I don't know if they still have the Beanstalk program, but here, this is kind of an example of what I'm talking about, though. The Beanstalk program gives all employees the opportunity to own stock in the company, and the company's commitment to training and benefits has established Starbucks as the employer of choice in the industry. That much is pretty much true. If you want to be a barista, that's the place to go work. Its turnover rate is 1/5 that of others in the industry. So, one method for linking strategic and operational planning at Starbucks is the balanced scorecard. Here's how the balanced scorecard works. There are 4 primary cells. Okay, I got a diagram here. I can't really show it to you, but let me see if this will translate very well over the radio. If not, if it's too visual, then I'll just cut it out. But anyway, so there are 4 primary cells in this exhibit that I created. Imagine, if you will, 4 primary cells, 4 big boxes, and each of these cells or boxes, there are financial, customer, process, and people/learning. In each cell, Starbucks would identify the key drivers that help translate strategic goals to operational issues. Each of those goals would also have a set of metrics. For example, on your customer metrics, Starbucks might look at percentage of repeat customers, number of new customers, growth rate, and the like. Under people/learning, managers might measure the number of suggestions provided by employees, participation in the Beanstalk program, employee turnover, training hours spent, and the like. Each of these cells links vertically. People management issues such as rewards, training, suggestions, and the like can be linked to efficient processes, brewing the perfect cup, customer service, etc. These processes then lead to better customer loyalty and growth. Growth in customer in turn lead to higher profitability and market value. The balanced scorecard can be used to develop measures and standards for each of these operational areas. And when implemented in this way, it helps translate strategic and tactical issues into operational criteria. Okay, using the balanced scorecard for planning. 1, clarify the vision. Executive team and middle managers use the... Okay, well, I guess it's about time to end the big show. So, anyway, I want to thank you all for tuning in. And tune into the next show. We're going to be doing another seance. I'm not quite sure when that'll be. It'll probably be next week, about the same time. Well, give or take. Been getting a little bit busier here lately. So anyway, thank you all for tuning in. And I just want to say, until we meet again. What the heck? Come on. Until we meet again, don't take any wooden nickels. Damn. I hate it when I screw up my tagline. How embarrassing.